Hello and welcome back. Today is all about the elements. We're going to talk about chemical elements, specifically the ones that you are required to know a bit more about, especially in relation to IB. There's always questions that relate these chemicals to other things we're going to learn, so you really need to know the basics of them before we move on to how they're incorporated in other processes that we will learn throughout the 2 years here. We're also going to talk about water, the properties of water, the polarity of water, and different aqueous solutions. So let's dive right in. To begin with, let's talk about the elements that you need to know about. You'll see all of the elements that I'm going to talk about are in bold. You don't have to write all of this down, but you should be relatively aware of what each of these do and why you should care about them. So carbon and hydrogen, we talked about that earlier. They are the foundation of organic molecules. You cannot be organic without carbon and hydrogen within your cells, within your living anything, really. Cells, tissues, anything. Hydrogen ions are used in active transport, photosynthesis, cellular respiration. You're going to be best friends with hydrogen ions by the end of this. They're used to measure pH, right? The more hydrogen ions you have, the lower the pH. So if you have a high amount of hydrogen ions, that means that you have an acidic pH. Low level of hydrogen ions means that it's basic. Oxygen is used in aerobic respiration. You use it to breathe. Animals use it to breathe, but that's probably what you know oxygen as, but aerobic respiration is probably its biggest process that oxygen is part of. Used in oxidation reactions, like breaking phosphate from ATP. That's how we get energy. That is also sort of in relation to aerobic respiration, right? Respiration is the creation of ATP, so it's kind of a continuation of that. Nitrogen, very important as well, used in the production of amino acids and used in chlorophyll, which is the green pigment in plants. And then iron, an important micronutrient. That's how we make hemoglobin, which is the oxygen binding component in blood. In plants, it's used to make chlorophyll, takes part in photosynthesis, so iron is massively important as well. And if you thought we were done, you were wrong. There's a few more you need to know. Calcium, probably have heard that you need to drink milk because it'll make strong bones. Well, yeah, kind of. You do need calcium because it's an essential mineral. And that mineral is used in bones and teeth, production of exoskeletons in insects, and essential in synaptic transmission. So when you are sending transmissions from neuron to neuron, like your brain is telling your arm to move and grab something, you need calcium to actually allow that transmission to move from your brain to your hand. So another important piece, but not just for bones. Phosphorus is used in the formation of phospholipid bilayer, which is your cell membrane, and an active component in ATP, which is energy. Sulfur is found in amino acids, important for protein synthesis. Sodium is essential in generating an action potential for nerve impulses. So again, important when trying to send information from your brain to anywhere else in your body. And also is the main cation in blood plasma. And then finally, potassium. Nerve impulses. Again, a lot of this stuff has to do with these major processes that happen within your body. We're talking respiration, photosynthesis, nerve impulses. All of this will be we're going to dive into it way more thoroughly. But for now, you just need to know the elements that are used and the basics of what they're used for. Okay? So I said this, cation, and if you are a little shaky on your chemistry, maybe you forgot what cation and anions are, but let's just give a brief definition so we're all working with the same definition when referring to these terms. So, ions in general are an unreactive atom that has a full outer electron shell. Okay, so that's just an ion. But you can have a cation and an anion. If you're a cation, it means you have more protons than electrons, so you're more positive. An anion is more electrons than protons, so you're more negative. You can remember this because cation has the word cat in it, and, well, even if you don't like cats, I love cats. So you can remember that I have a very positive relationship with cats. I love them. And anions sort of looks like onions, and while I personally do love onions, not everybody loves onions, so maybe more negative is thinking about onions. Okay? So moving on to water in general. We're going to talk about water, its polarity, and then we're going to talk about its properties that make water so unique. So water is polar, which means that they do not share their electrons evenly. So oxygen has a bit more of a pull on it than hydrogen, so the electrons move closer to the oxygen, giving it a slightly more negative making it slightly more negative. I'm blanking on the word. And then hydrogen, because those electrons are being pulled towards the oxygen, it makes the hydrogen slightly more positive. So it's polar, it's bent. You'll see that. You see how it's bent. It's not in a straight line. And that is because of this polarity, because the electrons are being pulled towards the oxygen. The bonds that connect the oxygen and the hydrogens are hydrogen bonds. The hydrogen bonds are what connects this water molecule to a second water molecule. The bonds right here that connect the oxygen to the hydrogen are called covalent bonds. So the hydrogen bonds that connect this entire water molecule to a second water molecule are relatively weak in comparison. That's why those bonds are more easily broken when going through the different properties of water, but they are strong enough to do a number of properties as well. So these bonds that you see on the screen, these are covalent bonds. The bonds that would connect this entire molecule to a second water molecule are hydrogen bonds. So, going through what polar and nonpolar mean, just so that, again, we have working definitions as we continue on. So molecules that are polar are hydrophilic. That means that they like water. The majority of substances that are important biochemically are polar, because water exists in like every single living organism, so if you have an important substance, it needs to play well with water. But there are molecules that do not interact with water, like oil, and those are called hydrophobic. So hydrophobic means they're just like afraid of water, they don't play well with water, so this is really like fats. And then proteins can be polar or nonpolar depending on the arrangement of amino acids, though typically play well enough in water. Now let's talk about properties of water. We're going to break this down into a few themes. So the first theme is the cohesive properties of water. So there are 4 in here. Remember I said that the bond between water molecules is a hydrogen bond. It's relatively weak, but if you have enough together, it can be very strong. This is like if you took a little twig, you could break it pretty easily, but if you put like 25 twigs together, it's a little bit harder to break, right? It's the same thing with the hydrogen bonds. So, different properties, cohesion and adhesion. So water sticking to itself. So water sticking to another water molecule, that's called cohesion. But water sticking to literally any other surface is called adhesion. So if you're driving and water is sticking to your window as you're driving because it's raining, that's adhesion. But as the water builds up and makes bigger and bigger puddles, that's cohesion. Okay, so water sticking to itself, cohesion, sticking to anything else, adhesion. When we're talking about plants, water moving up the xylem against gravity, that's called capillary action. And then finally, surface tension, where the surface of water is strong enough to support like certain insects, like you might have like a water strider walking across like the top of a river, that's called surface tension. It's strong enough to hold something really light, but if you were to try and walk on water, obviously that wouldn't work. Okay, moving on, the thermal properties of water, so this is like our second theme. Water has a high specific heat capacity. What that means is it takes a lot of energy for the temperature of water to change. Think about when you're boiling water, like trying to make mac and cheese, it takes forever, and you have like a flame literally right underneath it. It should be heating up quickly, but it takes so long for the water to actually start boiling. And this is due to the hydrogen bonds in water. Because there's so many hydrogen bonds, it tries to maintain stability. So temperature does actually stay relatively stable. It just takes a lot of heat, a lot of energy to get the temperature of water to change. And then because it takes a lot of energy to make water evaporate, like we were just saying, it's a good coolant. So when you are sweating, the water will come to the top layer of your skin and it will evaporate off of your skin. When it evaporates off of your skin, it also removes heat with it. And that's actually why it cools you down to sweat. It's not because you're losing water. It's because as the water and those bonds are breaking, you're releasing heat energy from it. So you're losing heat. Okay, this helps maintain homeostasis, keeps your body temperature more regulated. And then the solvent properties of water. Water is a good solvent because it's polar, so it dissolves most solutes pretty easily. Think like sugar or salt. It's really easy to dissolve those solutes in water. Ionic solids will break into their ions in water, and then polar attractions cause water molecules to surround and isolate solute molecules. I know, right? That's like a crazy sentence, but basically, if you have something ionic like table salt, it will break it down into its smallest parts, and then because they're both polar, they will attract, water molecules will surround it, and it will dissolve it within the water. This also means that water is good for metabolic reactions. Dissolved particles are able to move around, diffuse more easily, likely to collide with one another, which leads to a reaction. Typically, we want those reactions to occur. So all of these properties of water are like how organisms stay alive and are able to do all of these chemical reactions. Now, I'm just going to throw this up there. You should write this down. These are like general, like hot button topics that Ivy will talk about. So you have 4 aqueous solutions, right? Cytoplasm, nucleoplasm, stroma, and blood plasma. You have a location on where those aqueous solutions are found, and you have the common reactions that we are going to talk about ad nauseum. You will be pros at all of this, okay? So just the first 2 are found within a cell, and we deal with glycolysis, protein synthesis, DNA replication, transcription, translation. But beyond what's just in the cell, you also have the stroma, which is in plants, specifically for the reactions of photosynthesis, and then blood plasma, which is obviously in blood. This is the fluid in arteries and veins. This is for unloading respiratory gases, clotting blood, all of that. And then for our last 2 slides, we're just going to talk about specifics. So water as a solvent in plants and animals. In plants, we see water in vascular tissues. Xylem and phloem are the vascular tissues of plants. Xylem transports water, phloem transports nutrients. And then in animals, we have blood. It's the most common transport medium. I'm sure you could have guessed that without me telling you that. And some of the common solutes include glucose, amino acids, fibrinogen, and hydrogen carbonate ions. You've probably heard of glucose, you've probably heard of amino acids. We're going to talk more about the other 2, fibrinogen and hydrogen carbonate ions, as we continue through these slides. Not today, but as we continue through this topic. And then finally, the polarity of different molecules. This is just like a good check chart type thing, like going back and determining what exactly is happening. So we have glucose, that's sugar, that's polar, dissolves directly. Amino acids, varying polarity, but reasonably soluble, typically dissolves directly. Cholesterol, largely non-polar, which means it does not dissolve directly. Cholesterol is typically found in your cell membrane. So again, it will be transported by blood proteins that have amino acids on the outside, which helps to give solubility. Fats, non-polar, these are like oils, any lipid really, non-polar. You know, oil and water don't mix. Transported by blood proteins, again, the amino acids will help give solubility. Oxygen travels as diatomic oxygen, low solubility, but uses hemoglobin to transport, and hemoglobin travels well. And then sodium chloride ionizes. This is what I was talking about earlier. Sodium chloride is like salt, table salt, right? So it ionizes separately. It breaks, sodium chloride breaks down into sodium and chloride ions in an aqueous solution, which then allows it to dissolve. I know this one was a wild one, but there's a lot of information that you're going to need from here to apply to other units as we continue through IB biology as a whole. So I know this was a lot, but I'm really proud of you for making it through.